listener production.
Hi, welcome to The Briefing. Sacha Barbour Gatt with you. In Australia, over the next 10 years, $5 trillion is expected to be passed down through the generations. This includes around $2.3 trillion that'll go from boomers to their children, a further $1 trillion to their grandkids, and $1.7 trillion will go to charities. But what impact will this have on the economy and the housing market?
A lot of parents are helping their kids along the way. The Bank of Mum and Dad is currently the 6th biggest home lender in Australia. Compare
the Markets Economic Director David Koch joins us for that chat. But first, here are today's headlines with Antoinette Latouf. It is Wednesday, May 29.
Thanks, Sasha. G'day, everyone. So there was silence, a notable silence for about 36 hours, but the Australian government has finally weighed in, calling on Israel to stop its offensive on Rafah after 45 civilians were killed in their tents due to an Israeli bomb.
What we have seen in the past 24 hours reinforces why we and the international community issued this warning. The death and destruction in Rafah is horrific. This human suffering is unacceptable. And we reiterate to the government of Israel, this cannot continue.
Foreign Minister Penny Wong there. So in a separate written statement, she called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and the release of Israeli hostages that are still being held in Gaza. And it comes as the IDF reaches the centre of Rafah, taking over a strategically important hill overlooking the nearby border with Egypt.
Yeah, and the UN says around 1 million civilians, mostly women and children, have now fled Rafah, which of course they were forced to flee to when there was fighting in the northern parts of Gaza. But there are fears several 100,000 more people could still be sheltering there.
Yeah, and Sasha, I just want to unpack the written statement by Penny Wong that was released yesterday because it caught my attention and actually, annoyed me in quite a few ways. The deliberate use of certain language which either sanitised or confused what was going on, like what happened was referred to as an event. The event in Rafah. I'm like, what event? The theatre? A circus? Like, what event are you talking about? Let's be specific that people were sleeping in their tents and they were burnt alive. And I thought that it was a disturbing and deliberate sanitisation of language. The statement also ended up with saying, and Hamas should release all the hostages. Yes, absolutely. And stop using civilians as human shields. Like, there's nothing to suggest in that bombing attack. There is no evidence to suggest where babies and other children and families were sleeping that they were being used as human shields. And so, the baby's head, which was blown off by a bomb, it was probably manufactured by the United States while they were in a tent. And for me, it was beyond belief that this is where the statement ended. Still using confusing language and still trying to go, you're still using rhetoric that would suggest that the people who dropped the bomb aren't responsible for those murders.
Yeah, I feel like the thing with this horrific conflict is that governments feel backed into a corner, I think, because of their ties to Israel, and that puts them in that position where they're trying to please two people. They're trying to acknowledge the atrocities that are going on while not affecting their relationship with Israel. And that doesn't make it right or wrong or anything. It is a fact of geopolitics, and it's sickening from a human perspective where people, as you said, babies are being slaughtered. It's one of those things that keeps happening. What would you want to see change from Penny Wong? Like, what would have been a better response?
I think an absolutely firm and clear condemnation. And the condemnation is one thing because empty words can be followed by actual actions. Economic sanctions, expelling the Israeli ambassador. There are diplomatic things that you can do, pressure you can apply to say, we not only think this is horrific, we are using political levers to make it stop.
The daughter of a Perth double murderer has spoken out, claiming police ignored warnings about her father. Ariel Bombara says she contacted police on 3 separate occasions to tell them her father was a, quote, real and imminent threat.
I specifically mentioned that there was a Glock handgun which was unaccounted for. My understanding is this ultimately would be one of the weapons that my father used to take the lives of 2 innocent women. If we had been listened to, nobody actually listened to us.
Mark Bombara shot dead Jennifer Patelchis and her daughter Gretel last week while trying to track down his ex-wife. He then turned the gun on himself. WA Police Commissioner Col Blanche has announced that an internal investigation in response to Ariel's claims has been launched.
Yeah, so this was a really chilling and heartfelt statement from Ariel Bombara, who also said that gun laws alone couldn't change this and perhaps wouldn't have avoided the end result because she believes that her father was intent to cause harm, if not kill, and would have found another way. She's also implored government and police to do more and to specify exactly what it is that they're going to do more. She says on multiple occasions and after multiple pleas for a restraining order, these were not taken seriously by police.
Yeah, well, Col Blanche, the commissioner, went on to say, he was asked about why nothing happened. And, he said, we'll investigate. But his comments, he said, we're standing here today with the benefit of hindsight. And that just made my blood boil. I mean,
those two women are dead. Hindsight doesn't benefit them at all.
Exactly. And, he said, we usually issue an order if there's an imminent threat to people. We were warned 7 weeks in advance. It doesn't imminent. He killed those women. To me, that's an imminent threat, and he had guns, which is the concern. On the topic of guns, there are reforms currently being debated in WA Parliament, and the question is, would they have worked if they were in place before this senseless murder? It could have affected Mark Bombara's ability to own so many guns, or the one he used in the murders, but it does remain to be seen whether the new laws would have been more effective in enabling police to confiscate his firearms off the back of warnings from his ex-wife. So it's more questions than answers.
There are new statistics that show just how bad it's gotten for the country's renters. PropTrack data has revealed just 10% of properties available to rent right now are $400 or less, compared to more than 40% before the pandemic. And when you take out the regions, that number is much lower at just 5.9%.
Yeah, ouch. The worst performing capital cities, unsurprisingly, Sydney, just 2% of properties available for rent are under $400. The ACT is 2.1%, so the ACT isn't doing well either. Melbourne has 4% at less than $400. And, when these stories come up, the question's why? And it is the same old story. There is not enough supply to meet demand.
And interest rate hikes are being passed on to renters by many people who own investment properties or multiple properties. Like friends of mine just recently had their rent increased by 44% in one go. So they had no choice but to move.
And Pope Francis has been forced into a rare apology after he used a homophobic slur during a closed-door meeting. At the Italian Bishops' Conference, the Pope reportedly said gay men should not be allowed to train for the priesthood, adding there was already an air of, quote, froggiagini. We won't be translating that for you, but by the first letter of the word, you might be able to guess it.
And a statement from the Vatican said the Pope didn't mean to offend anyone and apologised to those who were hurt by the use of the word. While it's probably not going to surprise that many people that religious leaders may say homophobic things in private, what is rare is a papal apology.
Yeah, exactly. My question is, this was a private meeting.
Yeah.
Who leaked it? Because what happened, the quote of what he said started surfacing in media reports. It first went into an Italian tabloid and then it was picked up more widely. So it had to be leaked by someone. Who leaked it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess somebody who wants to be more inclusive or who believed Pope Francis when soon after becoming Pope, he famously said in response to a question, he asked about gay priests and he said, who am I to judge? So, I mean, he's publicly on the record seeming to be more welcoming. He said, everyone is welcome. And that's when, on another occasion, when he was asked about his objection to gay men. I just think it's somebody who doesn't like the double standard or the hypocrisy.
Yeah, maybe it's all just been PR for the Pope to kind of try and be seen as a little bit more liberal, just very slightly more liberal than what we've seen before from popes. But yeah, it's interesting to see him actually forced into an apology. That is it for today's headlines. Thank you, Antoinette. My interview with Kochie is coming up. Before that, we did want to let you know you can watch this chat as well. The full video is going up on our YouTube channel. To watch it, search Listener Newsroom. Inheritance is something we usually get on the back of pretty sad circumstances. But increasingly, people in Australia are finding themselves waiting for the cash to flow from dead loved ones so they can get their foot on the property ladder. And those people might be in luck, with the greatest transfer of wealth in modern times about to begin. Over the next 10 years, $5 trillion is expected to be passed down through the generations. Around $2.3 trillion will go from the boomers to their children, $1 trillion to their grandkids, and a further $1.7 trillion will go to charities. It sounds like a great windfall for thousands of people, but there are questions about how it will impact wealth inequality in Australia and how this will widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. David Koch, you might know him as Kochie, is Compare the Market's economic director, and he joins me now. David, thanks so much for being here. Look, we're talking about a huge amount of money here, $5 trillion. How did boomers make all their money?
Mainly through property. Property and just working longer than previous generations as well. And it's pretty incredible considering boomers haven't had the full impact of compulsory superannuation as Gen X, millennials will have in the future. So when those generations get to our age, or the boomer age, they will be passing on even more, because boomers didn't have the advantage of this national savings scheme that everyone's had the benefit of since the 90s.
Look, the question inevitably comes up.
Yep.
Did boomers have it as hard as the younger generations now when it comes to buying a house? I want to know your verdict.
Okay. My verdict is it depends. It depends when you bought your house. It depends what interest rates were like. For example, when money was cheap during the pandemic, I'm going to sound like your grumpy old father or uncle or whatever. I went through 17% mortgages, much lower loan by comparison. And certainly today's home buyers and first home buyers need a bigger deposit, and the size of their loan is a lot higher. Now, when interest rates were, a mortgage rate was 2%, my 17% was much harder. Now that interest rates, home loan rates have gone to 6%, it is certainly today's home borrower is doing it tougher than a boomer did back in the 17% days. But this intergenerational argument has been going on for hundreds of years.
Yep.
Believe it or not, when I had hair in my 20s, I felt the same thing about my parents. You're making it harder for us to get into the market. I saw a clip from the ABC, from their archives, of a land and house package sale back in the late 1960s, and they interviewed a couple who'd missed out on the auction. Exactly the same arguments. It was, the older generation, we got outbid by them. How can our age afford a home loan? And these prices, they were selling land packages for $2,000 at that stage. And it's all pretty relative. And that's not diminishing how hard it is for everyone. It's just that when you make a big ticket item like a home purchase, now it is going to be hard. It's hard for everyone unless, you come from a really wealthy family or you've inherited wealth or whatever. For the normal person, it's tough.
Let's talk about the inheritance issue, which you just touched on a little bit. So some experts have described the expectation of inheritance for today's younger people as warping the plans of the young people and what they're looking to do. Yeah. And I think what they're referencing there is the fact that a lot of the younger generations are waiting for that inheritance so they can buy a house, maybe choosing not to save right now, instead going, well, I know I'll be able to buy one day. In fact, I have a friend who said that to me the other day. What's your take on that?
The problem is mum and dad are living longer. That is the big issue. You might be waiting for mum and dad to cark it and get your inheritance, but you're going to have to be waiting a lot longer. But a lot of parents are helping the kids along the way. The Bank of Mum and Dad is currently the 6th biggest home lender in Australia. 75% of parents and grandparents are helping their kids out either financially or in kind, like doing 2 days of childcare a week, or a day a week is $150, which is $5,500 a year of savings. So families are pulling together.
What do you think then the impact will be on the housing market as we're starting to see this inheritance flow through the generations?
The housing market's going to be tight for a number of years, not just because of the intergenerational change, but because of the dynamics of the market. Property's pretty easy to understand. It's about demand and supply. We need 250,000 new properties per year just to keep that demand and supply in balance. Last year, we built 160,000. Next year, only 170,000. And building approvals, which is approvals from council, so this is, it'll take you 3 years to build the house, are at 10-year lows. So construction costs are so high, and governments, even though the governments go, landlords are skinning you, grumpy old landlords, they're charging you too much, governments used to build 50 to 60,000 low-cost houses per year. They build nothing today, all levels of government. So don't blame the landlords, because they're the ones actually providing the rental properties at the moment. They're suffering from higher interest rates and higher costs as well. Now, if you've got a rogue landlord, a narky one, they deserve to have the book thrown at them. But most landlords are average people, someone from your family, an auntie, an uncle, maybe even your parents. The average property investor has 1.5 investment properties. So they're small people. The biggest sector are teachers, would you believe?
That's interesting.
are the biggest private landlords. But so that's the nub of the problem. The intergenerational shift of wealth will just accentuate it. A big issue is the number of vacant rooms available. That is, mum and dad holding on to the family home after the kids have left. They've got to start downsizing so that can come into the pool.
And I think that's where a lot of the animosity comes from when it's Gen X, millennials, now Gen Z as well, when they're looking up at the boomers and going, you're hanging on to everything. You made the mention of landlords as well. They're the people that are going to be handing this wealth down throughout the generations as it
to
goes.
their kids.
Which leads me to my next question is, who's missing out? Who are the people who are not going to benefit from this wealth that's being built up by this generation?
Okay. It is those that have parents that don't have much to hand down. Those that have parents who have decided, hey, we're going to live life to the full and you're big enough and ugly enough to make your own way like we did, and we're not going to pass anything down. So that's going to be the big difference going forward, that there will be a gap, but generally that's a fairly small number of people. UBS's Global Wealth Survey has the average Australian at the second wealthiest in the world, behind the Swiss.
Is that because so much wealth is at the top though? Do you know what I mean?
No. It's much more evenly spread than most countries in the OECD. Okay. And again, it's property. If you get your foot on the merry-go-round, then it's a winner in the future. A big issue I've found in my family, my son is a classic example, rents a tiny place in Paddington in Sydney and goes, Dad, I can't afford to buy here. So, well, I can't afford to buy in Paddington, but we like living here. And I do the grumpy old thing, move further out. We don't like that lifestyle. So he ended up buying in Brisbane, and it's called rent vesting. So he's got his foot on the property ladder in Brisbane, rents that out, and then rents in Sydney where he wants to live. So you can get a foot on the merry-go-round in a number of ways. It could be, it's as easy also as in your superannuation fund, you have a lot of investment options. You can say, I might want my money invested more in international shares or Australian shares or property, skewing your superannuation fund to investing in property, investing in property shares, some of the real estate investment trusts that are listed on the market. and having exposure there. So like I don't own any investment property directly because I just think the transaction costs are way too high. Stamp duties, legal fees, real estate. It's so illiquid. If you want to sell, it takes you 6 months.
Yeah. And you're at the whims of, the property market and what it decides to do.
Yeah. Or a bad tenant or vacancies. No vacancies at the moment, but, only 3 or 4 years ago, vacancies were really high.
The question I've seen popping up in this conversation is around who is inheriting the money and who is giving the money, being that the people who are giving the money, the boomers, might have different societal expectations or beliefs or the way they go about their lives. They're giving money to this new generation or new generations that think differently to them. Now, the question's popped off is, well, will this have an impact on society? Do you think it will?
I think the basis is if you're the receiver, be grateful. No matter, you can't say, I'm waiting for the inheritance and I want it this way and that way. I want to decide how you distribute it. Like a lot of boomers will leave a lot to charities. Well, that's their prerogative and society benefits from that. And that's a great thing. So it is an unrealistic expectation. Remember, if you're waiting for the inheritance, it's not your money.
Yeah.
It's your parent. And they've worked hard for it. They started off struggling as well. Everybody wants to live the lifestyle of their parents when in fact they started with the same lifestyle as you did, struggling and built up over the years. You can't rush it. You've got to go through the process. You've got to work for it, build career, save up, look at your lifestyle.
Which people don't want to hear.
No.
Well, thank you for being the dad that we all needed. We appreciate it.
I did warn you at the start.
I know.
I did warn you at the start.
No, it's an important conversation. I think I know there'll be people who disagree with you and the way it's set out.
Like I disagree with my dad.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing. It is a rite of passage. We do inevitably expect more from the generations above us. Yeah, you're right. Thanks for giving us some food for thought.
Thanks for having me.
That was my chat with David Koch, Compare the Market's Economic Director. And that is all for today's briefing. Thanks so much for listening. Before you go, we would love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it or needs a talking to from Dad. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. We're also on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. We'll see you next time.
Listener.